Four?
That's Bob Colson there, Paul. I just checked in.
All right, thank
Hello,
you, Bob.
Tom.
Okay, we are live. It's not quite 3:30.
Well, I have 3:30. So we can call the meeting to order. And this is a meeting of the Executive Committee of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors, Wednesday, November 4th, 2020. And let's see, roll. I see Brian Johnson, myself, David Bartlett, Jim Anderson, Vaughn Hedlund, Diane Morehouse, Jim Tripp, Gary Steen, Kelly McCullough, and Chuck Maves, and Tom Quinn. So we have a quorum. Approval of the minutes. We have two sets. Supervisor Steen moves. Supervisor McCullough seconds. Any discussion on the minutes? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. We will move right into the staff reports with county manager, starting out with the review of the draft November 10th county board agenda. So Mr. Miller, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a copy of the draft agenda in the materials that were distributed for this meeting. First and foremost, highlighting again, this is a Tuesday meeting of the county board, November 10, the first Tuesday following the second Monday, or however the state statute reads. But the point is, it's mandated by state statute that it take place at this time. 7 p.m. is the meeting date. It will be a teleconference. I will highlight under petitions, memorials, and communications, we've got 3 longtime employees who are retiring. Kathy Gillenbach with Finance Department's been with us, I think, 21 years. Robert Freustad has also been with us for about 21 years. And then Dan Prestabach, our conservationist, has been with us for 42 years and will be retiring at the end of the year. Because it will be by teleconference, we don't anticipate having anything other than the acknowledgement. We have, as usual, ordered a plaque to acknowledge their many years of service to the county, but we won't be having a presentation per se, because this will be a virtual meeting, which doesn't de-emphasize the importance of recognizing their contributions. And then we have a public hearing on the fiscal year 2021 budget and property tax levy. Which brings us, it'll segue nicely into something that we'll talk about later about public input at meetings. But as a public hearing, we're required to allow public input. I've been working with IT, principally with Krista Vind, who is on this meeting as well, about how we accommodate persons who wish to speak at the public hearing. And there's a couple of ways that they can provide input. We have put in the notice that they can email to us for public comments, and their public comments will be acknowledged and included for the record. Or they could request to actually speak by email as well to us. Those requesting to speak at the hearing will send an email. They'll be acknowledged. They will be given, those who wish to speak at the public hearing will be given the Zoom link. And then Krista, as the gatekeeper, if you will, when it gets to the public hearing, Chairman Bartlett will open the hearing. We'll ask if there's anybody to speak. We'll acknowledge that have actually come in and said they wish, or sent an email saying they wish to speak. We'll call on them. Krista will admit them. They'll give their name and address and make their comments, and then be escorted back out of the meeting virtually. That way we make sure that we actually do accommodate public input at the public hearing on the budget. Are there any questions about that process?
Supervisor Steen.
Yes, Paul. The people that email comments in, are they going to be read out loud to the board?
That would be the intention. Obviously we keep a 2-minute limit. So, if somebody emails us War and Peace, we probably don't read the entire thing. If somebody, of course, uses inappropriate language, we wouldn't read that either. But the anticipation is, yes, emailed comments will be read into the record.
I agree. I think that's a good.
Other questions or comments on that process? Okay, moving on from there. So after the public hearing is closed, we go on to appointments, and then my report to the county board will, as always, start with COVID-19. I say as always, as if it's routine, and I guess I have to warn myself against complacency because it's not routine. If you've been able to read the emails that I've been putting out 3 times a week here to everybody about the status of COVID-19 in our county, we are experiencing a significant surge right now. So it remains a clear and present danger to our citizens, and we owe it to everybody as the county board and as county staff to acknowledge this pandemic, its consequences for our community, its potential consequences for persons, especially our most vulnerable, and that we need to emphasize through our behavior and through our rhetoric continued adherence to protocols. Supervisor Steen, you had a...
Supervisor Steen.
Yes, I don't know if it's just me or Paul seems to be very quiet. I'm having a hard time hearing him. Is anybody else experiencing that?
No, I hear him fine. How about the rest of you?
I'm here.
Turn your
Okay.
sound up, Gary.
Gary, you can turn up your volume on the lower, usually on the lower right. There's a little thing that looks like a speaker with sound waves coming up, and if you hover over that, it'll do a scale that you can ramp up the volume on your computer.
And I probably can turn my bell tone up too, so thank you.
Okay. So I will make a presentation on COVID-19. And of course, as always, the purchase orders over $40,000 will be presented. This month, the final county board meeting of the year, we will have annual reports from the highway department on its financials, the county treasurer's financial report, and the neighbors annual report. The director of the neighbors, Carmen Flunker, already said to me, unfortunately, it's mostly about COVID. And well, it is unfortunate, but that's what we need to hear. They have been working incredibly hard to try to protect the residents of the neighbors during this pandemic. So maybe it's appropriate that her report for the year feature those particular efforts. Which brings us to reports of committees, standing committees. The question here, because again, we're doing teleconferencing, are there any chairs from our various committees that want to make a oral report to the county board at the meeting on the 10th? If there are none, we'll drop that from the agenda. It's a fairly full agenda, as you can see anyway, so. Which then would bring us to the resolutions, reports, and ordinances from the various standing committees, and you can see that we have quite a number. Many of them are annual kinds of ordinances and resolutions, year-end, dealing with budget items, both wrapping up the 2020 budget and setting ourselves up for the 2021 budget. But there are also resolutions on other issues, and we will cover those subsequently here in this meeting. That concludes my report on the agenda for the November 10 County Board meeting, if there are any questions.
Any other questions? Supervisor Tripp.
Don't we have a second reading of that ordinance regarding ATVs?
That's item 11A.
Oh, sure enough. Thank you. Just missed it.
Any other questions? Marshall, is that a question? Okay.
I think Marshall is here in case anybody had any questions about that
Oh.
ATV thing.
Well, I saw him raise his hand, so I didn't know. All right, we'll move on. Number 5, items placed at the request of the chairperson. Well, because the COVID doesn't seem to be going away, it's getting worse. And following our health director's directive at no more than 10 persons inside, we looks like we'll be having a lot more of these Zoom meetings in the future over the winter. So, discussion on public comment at public meetings. I've heard from some people that we need public comment. I don't disagree with that. I think the public should be able to let us know what's happening. And now with what we're doing with our hearing, public hearing for this upcoming county board meeting, I'm wondering if this would work for public comment or what you guys think about it, I guess, before we turn it over to staff to see if they can get it done. So, any discussion on this? How do you guys feel?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Supervisor Morehouse.
I'm just wondering before I can sort of approach this. I mean, obviously it's a good idea, but before I can approach it sensibly, I'd love to hear from, I don't want to put Krista on the spot, but how much work that would be for the county board and 9 standing committee meetings and amidst other responsibilities.
It would just be emails coming in from individuals stating that they want to speak, and then I would just email them back with the Zoom link. So that doesn't take long at all. And then during the meeting, just admitting them. So it's not a lot of extra work on my part.
Okay, thank you, Krista.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Steen.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would volunteer to Supervisor Morehouse. Even if we have this process set up, I still don't anticipate that we would necessarily have a crush of people seeking to do public input. So I don't expect a huge volume.
Supervisor Steen, go ahead.
Yes, I think this is a good idea, and I would urge us to communicate how we plan to do this to the public so they have an idea how they can approach us.
The way it will be communicated, Supervisor Steen, will be in the notices that are sent out for each meeting, for each standing committee meeting. As we have drafted for the notice of public meeting for the November 10 County Board, there's a paragraph that says persons wishing to provide input during, in this case, it would be the meeting, may submit written comments via email or may register to speak at the meeting by sending an email to, and the address is public comments at co.dunn.wi.us. Instructions for those who wish to speak during the meeting would be found on the Dunn County website, and we provide that link. So that would be a standard part of the notice and agenda for every standing meeting.
I'm going to provide the link to the public comment section on the website in this chat, so you can review that later if you'd like.
Any other discussion on this? Thumbs up, I see 1 thumb, 2, oh, lots of thumbs, okay. All right, sounds like we're gonna ask staff to get this done and have it available for committee meetings and county board meetings going forward. Thank you. Moving on. 6, consideration of actions taken by the executive committee. We have none. Number 7, consideration of reports, resolutions, and ordinances to the county board from the executive committee. So 7A is adopting the 2021 legislative agenda. And we should probably have a motion for this in a second. And Supervisor McCullough moves and Supervisor Steen seconds. And did we want to have an amendment to this? Supervisor Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did suggest, and Corp Council has developed some language to eliminate the phrase unfunded mandates. If you recall our last legislative conference, following that meeting, I get into a rather heated discussion with one of our legislators because he took issue with that phrase, and it is a politically loaded phrase. So I asked if the Corp Council could consider some alternative language that means the same thing, but carries a little bit less political baggage. And he came up with what I consider to be a really nice solution to that. And I don't know if people have had a chance to look at that new language or not.
He did email it out shortly before the meeting. I've got it here. Let's see. Yes, Mr. Lang is on. So would you like to explain your what it is for those of us that haven't seen it, please?
Yes, and I did email it, but I only mailed it to Supervisor Tripp because he had indicated that he wanted to bring this up. And then I mailed it to the board chair and then to the county manager, as he is kind of the custodian of all of these documents. The language suggestion or proposal that I had was instead of saying state mandated services that are unfunded, I think that's what the language was. What I propose is support modifying the annual levy limit to include exemptions for the costs of services or programs mandated by state law that cannot be fully funded with state appropriations and any required county appropriations. So, for example, if the state doesn't provide full revenues to support the program, or if state law would require the county to match state revenue, or just to appropriate funds for a particular program, if it can't be met, then it would be included in that in the unmet funding aspect that Supervisor Tripp is addressing. He's right. Unfunded mandate has it has connotations to it that can get in the way of looking at the problem effectively. Anyway, that's the language that I proposed. Costs of services or programs mandated by state law that cannot be fully funded with state appropriations and any required county appropriations.
That would replace 6A.
Yes.
Under financial.
Yeah, support. Yeah, beginning with the word support. Support modifying the annual levy limit to include exemptions for the costs of services or programs mandated by state law that cannot be fully funded with state appropriations and any required county appropriations.
So if that sounds good, I think we need a motion to amend that.
Got a motion on the table to approve the legislative agenda. We did that in October. This whole thing, however, is being amended not only for that purpose, but we also received since the October meeting from the Health and Human Services Board 2 changes, which in the materials that were distributed for this meeting are items 3G and H. So those 2 have been added as well. So what would be appropriate, the motion would be to adopt the legislative agenda as presented and discussed today, recommended to the county board for adoption.
Okay.
Well, then, if that's the case, then the other suggestions made by Supervisor Tripp I could go over those too. I'm trying to pull up the email containing them.
I'd help you out, but I can't find it either.
One was under item 1A, instead of creation of and funding for a grant program to assist Dunn County in upgrading the 911 system, it would read support the creation of and funding for the program to assist Dunn County in upgrading 911. Same kind of thing, instead of just return on item 1B, return to Dunn County of a greater portion of the court support services fee. It would be rewritten to say support measures that would return to Dunn County a greater portion of those fees. Establishment under item 2B would be replaced with the word support establishment. And then I think the final one is the one we've already discussed.
Correct.
Supervisor McCullough.
We have a motion on the floor, and my Robert's Rules of Orders is kind of shouting at me. So we should either withdraw that motion if we want to do the other motion, or we should treat all of that as a sort of a basket amendment. And I don't particularly care which we do, but we really need to do one or the other to keep within the reasonable Robert's rules.
Yeah, I think we have a motion on the floor to accept it as printed. And so we could have a motion to amend it as discussed, and then vote on the amendment, and then vote on the original motion.
Correct.
So I need a motion to amend it as discussed, because it's not all in print. Supervisor Morehouse moves. Supervisor Steen seconds. Any further discussion? And I assume either Mr. Miller or Mr. Lang has all this copied down for what we want.
We both do. We're that efficient.
Okay. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Supervisor Headland, I'm sorry, I saw your hand go up right when I was talking.
That's okay. It's just a question about down in the background information, which isn't really part of the amendment, or the agenda anyway. But if you look at the second line, affect the ability of counties to effectively deliver.
Effectively and efficiently deliver services to their citizens.
Sorry, that's my printer.
All right.
My printer kind of bludged there, and so I thought it was the same word twice.
Okay. We're back to the original motion. Any discussion then as amended? If not, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, thank you. 7B, resolution adopting the FY 2021 budget. It's gone through a lot of amendments, and I don't think that one's changed. So, has it, Mr. Stray?
No, this really just is
Okay.
putting it in the resolution format from what was presented to the county board recently.
So I
And
need a
it was
motion.
also, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, it also matches up what went out in the public hearing notice.
Right. Supervisor
David, I would
Headland
so move,
moves.
Mrs. Vaughn.
I need a second. Supervisor McCullough seconds. Any discussion on the 2021 budget that'll be presented to county board? If not, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. We'll move that on. Let's see, resolution adopting the FY 2021 levy. Supervisor McCullough moves. Supervisor Quinn seconds. Any discussion? Do we need an explanation on this? Anything? Seeing nothing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? All right. 7D, resolution approving FY 2020 budget adjustments. We have two of these. 7D is the first one. This afternoon, you were sent out an updated budget adjustment. Things are changing regularly with this. And I would call on our CFO to explain it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as is done annually, there is a final budget adjustment that more or less combines and consolidates all of the requests submitted by departments and recommendations from the standing committees. And this is the final budget adjustment for the year. I did send out an update and explained more or less the background on it. It was adjusting some things that were one piece of information that was not wrapped into the summary document. Believe it or not, this is a summary presentation of all the detailed line items that were adjusted through all of these budget adjustments presented in October. So if that gives you a sense of the scope and size of this. These are the normal non-COVID adjustments that take place at year end. Department of Human Services with all their grants that we have to manage and adjust as things change through the year. This is kind of the final culmination. So that's what is presented to you today. It is separated in two budget adjustments, partly because of sheer size, but even more so did want to separate the COVID grants from the non-COVID operating budget adjustments. So that's why it's presented today for your recommendation to County Board.
Any questions on this? I don't see any, so all in favor say aye.
Motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Did we have a motion?
We didn't have a motion or a
Yes, we
second.
did.
I didn't think so. Sorry.
I didn't record a motion or a second.
Supervisor, or was that for the first?
That was,
one
the last
before
one
that?
was, yeah, the one before was Supervisor McCullough and Supervisor Quinn. We need a motion in a second. for this.
Oh, I thought we had Supervisor Headland moved. Didn't you?
That was on resolution for the 21 budget.
Oh,
Headland
I'm
and McCullough.
sorry.
That's okay.
I'll
we
move
need
approval, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we have a motion by Supervisor Morehouse and a second by Supervisor Headland.
Thank you.
So do we need to vote over?
Yes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. All right, well, now the second one. We'll get a motion this time for sure.
I don't know if you want to do that first, Mr. Chair, and then I'll.
Yes,
go
I
over it.
do.
Thank you.
That's the way we usually do it. Supervisor Johnson moves. Supervisor Steen seconds. Now you can explain it.
Okay. If those on the committee remember earlier this year when COVID-19 first happened and we're kind of dealing with trying to roadmap and plan out how this was going to impact our operations, one of the things we did was bring forward to you a resolution acknowledging the fact that our operation is going to change significantly, which would have financial impacts and budgetary impacts. And the county board did approve that resolution, but we also committed in there that we would bring back a final budget adjustment. Included in the packet today, as well as the original rollout, was a combination of COVID-19 routes to recovery grant funding that we've received, as well as provider relief grant funding that we've received. Let me tell you, the team has had quite a challenge trying to keep on top of these. In some cases, the provider relief grants, in some cases, just show up. In some cases, we apply for them. And then for the COVID-19 routes to recovery funds, that's an allocation that the state of Wisconsin communicated to us. And then we had to make the expenditures and have the equipment all installed and then request reimbursement. So it's been within a very tight window of time. I can say, I do want to point out in the narrative section that on the last page of this resolution in the routes to recovery, the county was awarded $725,428. But we also had a number of towns through the efforts of the sheriff and others to reach out to towns that could reallocate to the county unused funds that were allocated to them. So we had the listed towns actually reach out to us and go through the process to transfer those dollars to us, which the county then did use to purchase technology, body scanners, I believe UV sanitation equipment, things like that. So all things that we needed to adjust operations to COVID-19. New today, and the reason I had to send an update today is on Monday, we received another award of $105,115 for incentive payment at the neighbors for infection control and our success there. So their efforts are even being recognized, and through whatever criteria, we're receiving funding for it. So I felt it important to include that in this last resolution so that we have the budgetary authority to utilize those funds as needed and as these grants allow. So this is the final culmination as it stands today. At this point, we won't be able to do anything more with the budget, but at least we've recognized the grand total here adjusted for all these grants is $2,107,000 received by the county. There are some other allocations that have come in that you've seen in other budget adjustments to DHS and public health primarily, and those have been processed previously. So there is the chance that some of the dollars allocated to NDC may need to be returned if we can't use them all. There's been substantial funding, but it's also come with some pretty significant limitations on what can be used for. And one of the biggest ones that doesn't work in our favor is we can't claim lost revenue. So we're doing everything we can to capture those funds within the eligibility. So sorry for the long explanation, but this is obviously a very unique scenario, and we're meeting our obligation and what we wanted to do and our intent to report out on this. Any questions? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried.
Apparently the dog is opposed.
Yeah, I heard that. All right, moving on to 8A. Review of reports, resolution, ordinance coming to the county board from the standing committees, from the Planning, Resources and Development Committee, resolution adopting farmland preservation plan amendment. Supervisor Quinn, go ahead.
Yeah, I can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is very straightforward. We had our committee had a request from landowners in the town of Grant to expand an existing agricultural enterprise zone in that area. We had a public hearing on October 13th, I guess, and reviewed the petition and the maps, approved them, forwarded them onto the state. They approved them, and now it's coming back before our county board. If it's approved by the board, it's incorporated into our comprehensive land use plan.
Any questions? If not, thank you. Moving on to 8A2, resolution authorizing an application for the Lake Management Plan Implementation Grant. Supervisor Quinn, you're up again.
Again, real straightforward. We've been invited basically to apply for this grant. It'll provide funding to expand the ability of our soil health specialists to do outreach beyond the Red Cedar area where they're focused right now. So it'll expand our ability to provide those services to producers throughout the whole county.
Any questions? If not, we'll move on to 8A3 from the Planning Resource and Development Committee, a resolution adopting a land use fee schedule for 2021. And Supervisor Quinn, you want to explain that too?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, this is, we discussed this in the committee. Basically, we have, planning, sanitation services, inspection services, and other planning services that that sometimes require additional effort beyond what our staff is able to do. So rather than have them, and they're often time sensitive to the demands of contractors and homeowners and whatever citizens. So in order to facilitate that, we are recommending that we increase the fees, the land use planning fees by $50 per service, basically throughout the, my dog is giving my neighbor a hard time. Sorry about that. What this will allow us to do is basically contract for services during busy periods. And the idea is to try this for a year. We think that $50 is enough to cover the additional cost of contracting. It'll allow us to provide services in a timely manner. And we'll see how it goes. If it needs to be changed at the end of the year, we can do that.
Thank you. Are there any questions on that? Supervisor Steen.
Yeah, Tom, I got a question.
Sure.
Why wouldn't we want to utilize our staff to do that by paying overtime or else getting a limited term person to handle it?
I think the feeling is that it is more work than our current staff can do. They're over the staffing level we have, which is what's in the budget, and is just not adequate to keep up with the demand, especially in a year like this, where this year has had a lot of construction, a lot of requests for permits, and the feeling of the committee is that the best way to deal with that, rather than add permanent staff, is to contract for services from professional providers in the area. And we can do that. Our staff will do as much as they can, and we'll do much of the work on the inspection once the field work is done by the contractor. But it just seems like the most efficient way of dealing with the problem.
Supervisor Steen, you have another question?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding them correctly, would we be able to track this at the end of the year, saying, let's say we used our guys on overtime basis versus your contracted services fee?
Yeah, that's the idea, Gary.
All right, any other questions? If not, thank you, Supervisor Quinn. Moving on to 8B from the Committee on Administration. Resolution canceling checks over 2 years old. Supervisor Headland, do you want to explain that?
Each year we go through, this is a process of, I don't want to call it cleaning house, but the process of cleaning up an issue where these checks were all issued at least 2 years prior to this point and have not been cashed. And so each year we create this list, we cancel the checks, and if anyone on the list would seek reimbursement, In the future, they can come in and get a new check issued. And so we're not canceling our obligation. We're just getting these old checks off the books so that we don't have to do.
Any questions? All right, moving on to 8B2. Resolution charging back illegal tax certificates. This is from the committee administration also. Supervisor Headland. Did you want to take this or?
This is a pretty self-explanatory. Again, this is situations that occur when a partial is for some reason double taxed. And a lot of times it's a small parcel or an adjoining parcel that got added or whatever the case may be. But we need to make that adjustment because there's been a double tax charged to this parcel. And so we're eliminating that double taxation. And we just have two of them, as you can see in your notes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? If not, moving on to 8B3, resolution regarding FY 2021 pay grid and other compensation. Supervisor Headland, did you want to take this one or?
I'll defer that to Mr. Miller if he'd like to.
All right.
This is included, actually, the numbers that are set forth here are included in the budget as well. This represents the changes to the pay grid, which in this case for the 21 budget is an adjustment of 2% to the pay grid. It also freezes steps. That was a budgetary consideration that we've spent quite a bit of time discussing as we pulled together the 21 budget. And the other pay related items that are covered include health benefits that are related to our health insurance, co-pays and deductible changes that we've had to do because of the increasing costs of providing health care. As I said, all these were vetted through the executive committee in September and October, and this resolution memorializes them. It's an action by the county board.
And it also has to do with health
insurance and dental
changes.
Right.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Moving on. 8C from the Judiciary and Law Committee, a resolution creating a crime prevention funding board and establishing a surcharge. Supervisor Tripp, are you going to take this, or I see we have two representatives of the Sheriff's Department, the Sheriff and our Chief Deputy. So
I will lay out the groundwork and then our two law enforcement officials can fill in the details if anybody has any questions. What this resolution would do is allow Dunn County to establish a crime prevention funding board, and you see the makeup of that in the resolution. It would be funded by a $20 surcharge applied basically to all convictions in the county. The projection is that it would raise $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, and that money could then be used by an independent board to make grants to fund crime prevention activities. Now, primarily, this is intended to fund Crime Stoppers. If you recall, Crime Stoppers at one time was funded through the CR&T committee as an outside agency. More recently, Chief Deputy Maltoff has used his time and efforts to solicit contributions from private individuals and businesses to support the program. This will provide a source of funding, and the board then on an annual basis at least would make grants to programs that are established or modified or continued to prevent crime. With that, if you have any questions, I'm sure Marshall or Sheriff Bigg would be happy to answer those questions, or they might have some comments they'd like to add now.
Either one of you two guys have something to add?
Go ahead, Marshall. He's much more versed in this
All right.
process than I am.
Just to add a little more of these funds that are collected by the clerk's office, kept at the treasurer's office under control of the Crime Prevention Funding Board. They can take requests for grants once a year, like Supervisor Tripp said, from nonprofits whose primary purpose is crime prevention. That's pretty specifically and narrowly defined under the state statutes. Crime Stoppers as a nonprofit agency would be eligible for those grants. A portion of these grants can also be used by the sheriff's office specifically for crime prevention purposes, also as I believe defined by the statute. This would help in.
You got muted somehow.
You got muted, Marshall.
Sorry about that. It would also assist, it would assist Crime Stoppers, any other agency that falls under that statutory definition, as well as the sheriff's office, once creation of a crime prevention program or one that meets definitions is created.
Any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Tripp.
Marshall, there is a component in this that requires the funds to go to an agency that is not part of the sheriff's department. Is that correct?
Correct. Statute states a certain percentage must be issued out every year. I believe the intent of that is to make sure that this just isn't piled up, it's not utilized, and that it's distributed somewhat equally between law enforcement and those nonprofit agencies that meet the statutory definition.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you. Moving on, 8D from the Health and Human Services Committee, resolution supporting the commitment to Veteran Support and Outreach Act. Supervisor Morehouse, did you have some comments? Or
Sure.
I see Mr. Quinn is on also.
Well, if Greg is on, let's ask Greg to speak on this.
Okay. Greg, are you there?
I am. Good afternoon.
Okay, great.
What this, the request for supporting this act is it's recognized there's a high incidence of suicide rate for veterans throughout the country. And one of our senators here in Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, along with a few others, had co-sponsored legislation to identify the work that county veteran service officers do throughout the country, and the fact that there's zero federal dollars that go in to support your first point of contact for veterans that are leaving service, and the importance of that first contact to engage in VA healthcare, crisis intervention, and other benefits. And so what this does is a request for funding to be provided to states, and then to be pushed down to increase the number of county veteran service officers throughout the country, or plus up already existing county veteran service offices to do that outreach and do that support. And so that's what we're requesting to support that. The National Association of the Counties supports it. National Association of CVSOs, Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs, a number of other stakeholders. So that's what our request is to help potentially bring some federal dollars into the efforts that are done throughout the country. Any questions for me on that explanation?
Any questions from anybody? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, next we would go into closed session. Before we do that, we've heard reports from most of the standing committees. Is there any reports from any of the other ones that you would like to report on at this time before we move into number 9?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Supervisor Maves.
Yes, I would just like to update the other members on what facility's been doing. We do have one thing. Basically, it's business as usual for most things. Winterizing buildings, et cetera, for the upcoming winter coming up. But the one item I wanted to highlight was the fact that utilizing the CJCC house, the building behind that we tried to sell, actually get rid of twice, and we're unable to get any takers. And so Scott came up with an idea to actually move into his office and work area into that house. And then that would be freeing up space in the basement for the records recording room and other activities there. And so they're working on that, and I thought it was a great idea. And so I want to make everybody aware of the fact that Scott has done this, and he's come up with a lot of good ideas, and just he's really thinking, outside the box. So I think it's a great move. And I also wanted to update the staff or the other people. We had a request, there was a question about the archery hunt in Monoman Park and on the county lands inside the city, as far as registering the deer because of the CWD issue that Dunn County has been placed in that zone. And I contacted the DNR, and they said that they are recommending that any deer taken by archery is taken to a testing site, but it's not mandatory. So I contacted the rec department, Menominee, and they are going to add that recommendation on when they issue out new permits. And they were going to call all the people who have permits, informing them that also is a recommendation that if they do get a deer, that it is tested for CWD. So that's the end of my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Supervisor Morehouse.
I suspect we all know how absolutely pressed our health department is. Last month when we met, there were 900 cases, and we're like almost 400 up from that. And the health department has had to start handing off contact tracing to an already overworked state staff. So I'm just suggesting that if you felt like passing along a thank you to the staff that is just absolutely working beyond their ability to work and doing it extremely well, and certainly to be supportive in the community about the non-medical mitigation efforts, masking and distancing and so on. It's, our health department is really pressed to the wall. So I just thought that I would share that. I'm sure that you all know that, but I thought I would just pass it along.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Supervisor Johnson.
I'd just like to report that from the neighbors that there's only been 8 cases of staff that have been infected with the COVID, and at this time there are no residents. Otherwise, our last meeting was mainly COVID. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else before we move on? All right, at this time, we will go into closed session. The committee may go into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85(1)G to confer with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted with respect to pending or possible litigation with regard to disputed payment to a contractor.
I am going to stop the live stream now.
Yes.